We're going to be talking to Timothy Millett, LAPADA member, and purveyor, I would say, of extraordinary things, often from the humble and to the exceptional, but always with an amazing story to tell. And we're going to be looking at love tokens today, as well as loss and disrespect as well. So these are kind of, we'll learn more from Tim, but these are kind of wonderful coins and tokens that have been repurposed for different things. So to cock a snoop at the politicians of the time, but also to say farewell and to write some very tender messages. And they have incredible stories attached to them. I think you probably are familiar with the exhibition that Tim did, actually maybe sort of 20 years ago, but there is still a selection of books available called Love Tokens. And he's also on his website, which is Historic Medals, he's put many of them into the form of cards. So should you wish to tell a loved one some wonderful message, you can do this. Aha. I think he's coming. And now, oh, and connecting.
Okay. Here we go. All right.
Hello.
That's a slightly nervy couple of moments there.
Yes, where I just blabbered on, hopefully making some sense, but it's very nice to see you.
Thank you. Yes. Thank
you so much for joining us. So, I was just kind of giving a little introduction to what we're talking about, but I think given the name of the conversation, we can probably go straight into it, and then you can introduce a little bit more as we go. But I was just talking about you as well as a dealer and the sort of fantastic array of things that you sell. And we've known each other for a long time now, and we've spoken about Nelson memorabilia and all sorts of things. But I wonder, what kind of got you into the trade in the first place and collecting these tokens? So how did this passion come about?
On my mother's side of the family, they were coin and medal dealers, and I always remember as a 10-year-old, so this is 1970, being taken up to the old office at the back of the Strand, and I think for the morning went into the shop for half an hour and then went off to see the Battle of Waterloo, which must have been the hottest film in town in 1970. So that was my introduction. And then I sort of had, probably a slightly embarrassing sort of nerdy interest in coins in my teenage years. So that's really the background.
And so when did that sort of I suppose burgeoning passion of a child turn into the sort of embers of a career? I mean, when did it start formalizing? How old were you when you
what I did, so my late teens and as a student, I used to go up to the office and maybe work there for a couple of weeks. I think in my mind I was always going to join the firm, and so I always took it for granted that would be the case. So early 20s, I really got established, went in properly and joined them. And I was the youngest there. Sorry.
For those who don't know what the firm was, so it was a numismatic.
Yeah, A. Baldwin and Sons. Yeah, one of the very old-fashioned firms.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that was it. I was the youngest there by literally some decades.
And so they had this fresh-faced young boy come in, and what did they have you do then?
I think they panicked and thought, "Oh my God, what do we do with him?" So I remember my first real job when they allowed me to do anything so even vaguely significant was there was a cabinet of Matthew Bolton proofs and patterns. And if anyone knows that subject, if you think of the currency coins of Matthew Bolton, it's the same. On the reverse, you've got Britannia and a tiny little ship. And this thing is probably less than a centimetre high. And my first job was to sort out proofs and patterns according to the standard work peck, according to the number of stays it had on the sails. And I remember thinking to myself, is that really what it's all about?
And then when did you discover your first token, your first sort of?
I think having sort of thought, right, well, look, you know, he's got some potential here. One of the subjects right through the 20th century have been very popular, but gone under something of a cloud, was 18th century trade tokens, and they had a huge number of those. And there were some very big collectors right through the century. For some reason, they'd got hold of literally box after box, peak freeze tins of tokens, all rolled up in brown paper that had been put to one side decades earlier. And I think
I'm just going to stop you because I think when we spoke about it before, was it right that they were covered in rubble from the Second World
War? Covered in rubble, because literally no one. One of the features of the company was that everybody took quite a narrow field. Like you'd have an expert on Byzantine coins, you'd have an expert on English hammered coins, and you know, these had just been forgotten for decades. And really, it was this moment when I realised that, you know, I was just stuck in the corner going through these rolls. And you know, there's a book, Dalton and Hamer, which is the standard work. I was supposed to be sorting these things out without really having any idea what I was doing, and I started finding the odd engraved coin. I had no idea what it was. I said to you the other day, the first one I found, which I thought, you know, this is really of some significance, and just completely captured my imagination, especially compared with counting the stays on Matthew Bolton pennies, was a cartwheel penny, which on one side it said Gibbs, Lord Mayor, pelted with rotten eggs, and on the other side, where Britannia's sitting on by the shield with holding the trident, Britannia's shitting on the shield with the face as marked out with a silly face grinning, and it says Gibbs. And Alderman Michael Gibbs was one of the most corrupt and desperate Lord Mayors of London ever, 1845-46. His nickname at the time was Gobble Gibbs, and you know, he was absolutely synonymous with the worst of corruption and politics. So that was really the trigger for me.
They're amazing. I mean, they're amazing sort of history commentary, really, aren't they? In terms, and so you were sort of sorting through the box, and when did you start to actively collect them and understand there was some value in them?
I think, you know, what I started to do to start, you know, remember, I was largely left on my own to sort these things, and as long as, you know, ostensibly I appeared to be learning something, I was pretty much left with these dozens of tins and just get sorted. And to be fair to myself, I think I did actually, having started to think, you know, what on earth am I going to do? I actually started to appreciate them quite quickly, and I knew a reasonable amount about 18th century industrial history, so this sort of got me. But maybe one in every 500 coins, I might find one that was an engraved one, and I just started putting them to one side.
And so, what period do most of them cover in terms
You're
of?
really talking, I mean, you know, we've got this book coming up later on in the year, and we've got some fantastic contributors to the book. I mean, one of the great things about doing a project like this is the number of academics you can get involved who come at it from a completely different angle. So see, you know, I was trained to be a numismatist, so I theoretically see things from that angle, but they're coming at it from such a different angle. And I think what we increasingly think, there's a strong connection with John Wilkes and the radical politics of the 1760s, which is where they first seem to appear in any number, and I suppose they've gone out of fashion by the 1840s and 50s.
Okay, and how and why were they made?
I think if you look at, we have an idea of marriage as being a very specific thing. I think for working class people, the idea of an official marriage was pretty much hit and miss in those days. You get the idea of a coin cut in half that you could join together. There was this idea of exchanging silk ribbons. If you look at working class art in the 18th century, there's all kinds of things that appear to be a kind of unofficial betrothal, that sort of thing. And I think the love token developed out of this, and you get political ones early on. Then you get, because remember, one of the big things, which is like another subject on its own, is for much of my time I've been interested in the tokens that relate to transportation to Australia. So in 1787, the first fleet left. And remember, most of these people who, 10 years earlier, they would have hanged. Yeah. Before 1776, with the Declaration of Independence, a good number of them would have gone to America. So you had that period between 1776 1787.
And I think the people who are joining us, there's a lot of members and a lot of people who will know quite a bit about this, but there are others who won't. So take us into what Newgate Prison was like at that time, and why a convict would then take a coin and repurpose it. Give us
Sure. Well, say somebody had been convicted. This is at the time. We'll take it from the Australian angle. Yeah. There they were. They had been convicted. They'd been sentenced to transportation. Chances are they might have never been more than 5 or 10 miles from home before. Suddenly, you're going 12,000 miles. Newgate Prison operated, largely as a business, really. If you had money in Newgate, you could live, not the life of Riley exactly, but you could live pretty nicely. If you didn't, life was very, very tough. 2 days a week, I think it was Wednesday and Sunday, visitors were allowed to come in, family members, girlfriends, all that sort of thing. And undoubtedly, the convict knew once he'd been convicted, he had an opportunity to see the family before he left. And that is when these gifts were exchanged. And they were known amongst the convicts at the time as leaden hearts. And that was what they called them, literally grinding the surface off what was normally the cartwheel penny of 1797. And it's actually it's quite fun to do. You either a sharpened nail that you tap in, literally like pin pricking, or if you're more talented, you can actually properly engrave, but that's much tougher. To sit down with a sharpened nail and a copper cartwheel penny is quite fun, but actually much more tougher than you'd think.
In terms of, I know, each token really has the potential to tell an incredible story. And I thought maybe you could take us through one of the most memorable to date. And we had a conversation about something which actually draws all in the book and some of the contributors and some other people, doesn't it? So I just wondered about those poor...
Yes, I'll tell another one, actually.
Oh,
yeah, well, it's just, you can pick a random. I won't talk about that one we were talking about the other day, because that's going to be one of the real star turns of the new book. So I'd probably hold back on that.
Hold the space later in the year.
Exactly.
Okay.
I've really now put 2 collections together, and well, I can't find it now, but where are we? That's the book for the first collection, which was really based around the convict love tokens.
You've still got some of those to sell.
Still got some of these available. But in the first book, there was a fantastic story of the last serious Luddite activity in England, which was Coventry in 1832. And 2 lads were sentenced to death. Thomas Burberry and Benjamin Sparks. Well, it's quite a complicated story. 1832, the year of the Reform Bill, a lot of things going on. Coventry was a relatively middle-class area with a lot of people allowed to vote. When they were sentenced to death, there was a local cause. The local MP very much got involved, went down to see the Home Secretary, and it was commuted to life transportation. Well, I've got letters. And so remember, this is Thomas Burberry, convicted 1832, and he was about to hang, and he got his reprieve. Sorry?
What's he convicted of?
Luddite activity. They burnt down a silk weaver's machine in Coventry because they were worried about unemployment, and it was a big deal at the time, very big deal indeed, and it featured in one or two well-known books. Anyway, Thomas Burberry, I've got a letter from his great grandson, Sir Stanley Burberry, who was governor and chief magistrate of Tasmania. And if you think about it, how many families in London in 1832 could say, look, we were at the bottom of the pile, and in 150 years, we've gone right to the top. And I think, there are some wonderful stories like that. Equally, there are some absolutely desperate stories. So,
Can you think of a romantic one to tell us, given that we've got Valentine's Day coming soon?
Yeah, of course. All I can remember is the horror stories.
Yeah.
There's another one I think, which is very, very touching. I'm not sure I could call it a Valentine, but just on the front it says, M.A. Whitlock, adieu, dear aunt, adieu, 1831. So there I am, 35 years ago or whatever, finding this coin. All you've got is Mary Ann Whitlock. No, I think it's actually M.A. Whitlock, not even Mary Ann, in 1831. In fact, Mary Ann Whitlock was a farm labourer in Norwich in 1831. She was convicted of stealing a silk purse which had half a crown in it. 1831, she was packed off to Tasmania. She'd already been arrested for vagrancy around Norwich before that. When she arrives in Tasmania, you remember 10% of convicts were women. So a woman, even in the 1830s, potentially was in for a very, very tough time indeed. She eventually was married off after some really gruesome stuff, was married a much, much older man. And you just feel, you started to say at the beginning about that, the idea that you open a door of, a blank page, and you have this amazing story which then appears. And the story of Mary Ann Whitlock is absolutely that. And in fact, later in life, things do slightly improve for her. But, you really get the impression the early days of Australian life was so tough.
Yeah, and I'm sure the journey, as with so few women over, was pretty tough for her too. With the tokens and the sort of the history that you follow, it's amazing that so many have survived, and I suppose that's because they were cherished. But how were they given, and then how have they ended up then with you?
Well, because where I was unbelievably lucky, if you think about it, these things are really of interest to Australians.
Yeah.
Parting gift over here. So, being in the coin trade, I was in an incredibly lucky position to, once I'd picked up on, these were really regarded as the absolute bottom of the pile. Numismatists are very, very hot on condition, rarity, all that kind of thing. In the 1980s, these were regarded as the dregs, really, and that was incredibly lucky for me. That I think actually most people thought, there I was. I was joining one of the top numismatic firms, and the thing that appealed to me wasn't the top of the tree; it was the bottom rung on the ladder. It really was. But that suited me very nicely indeed. and I came along rarely.
And I mean, in terms of when, somebody's in prison, they were going to get hanged, they then get the reprieve to then go on the ship to Australia. So they did their coin, and then how did they sort of get it out to give it to their loved ones?
Well, I think is the whole thing I was saying about Newgate. Newgate was very much, if you think about Newgate, was right smack in the city of London, wasn't knocked down till 1902. So it was an incredibly important place, and you could have easy access to it. It's not like turning up at Wandsworth where you have to go through gate after gate after gate. I mean, there's some wonderful stories about, for example, the night before the convicts appeared in, were coming up in the Old Bailey, to talk about the local publican coming to the say the railings in the road might go down into the cell. So the local publican had been paid a certain amount to come around with a huge jug of beer, and he'd be tipping the beer through the railings for the lads who were all up in the dock the next day. So, our sense of what prison is and what prison was in reality is very, very different indeed. And there would have been lawyers, it just was a constant activity.
So I'm sort of imagining you in down in the bottom of the building with all these coins, learning and building this passion. But and obviously you identified something rare and full of heart and stories that you could follow. Has the other people caught up with you now? Are they now quite sought after? I mean, I don't want to give the game away if there's certain tokens you're still trying to acquire, but value.
I think that's no doubt about it. I mean, doing the first book was a significant moment. So you win in some ways, you lose in others. It was nice to do the book and met some very, very interesting people, and we had a couple of exhibitions, so that was very good indeed. But of course, I think probably what changed things more than anything, the world of numismatics was frankly a bit of a cul-de-sac in the past. You were either a serious numismatist and you did your stuff, or you weren't. And I think, like so many areas, the internet has completely changed that. Is this numismatics? It obviously is numismatics, but it's, as much as anything, it's social history, isn't it? And I think the world for social history is there in its millions. So it's, it reaches, thank God it didn't reach that world, because I could never have got started. So I had such a head start, and because I was in the trade, I was able to fish these out, from the beginning, really.
And if somebody wanted to learn more, where should they start? Obviously, your book is a great place to start.
Well, so we got the one I alluded to a bit earlier. One of the great things about the first book was particularly really about Australian convict tokens. But what happened for me as a result of that, I met so many fascinating people who were interested in the subject from a completely different angle. I mean, one of the first people I met was a man called Tim Hitchcock. Now, if you look up the history of the Old Bailey online, which is a fantastic website, it's all the cases that were at the Old Bailey from the 1690s onwards. He built the Old Bailey online. So for me to have a connection to him coming at it from a completely different angle, he's written the most fantastic chapter in our forthcoming book about a particular incident in Newgate in the 1770s. And it's, he's coming at it from a different angle. He's got a fantastic knowledge. He understands these things in a way that I would never have been able to come at them from that angle.
And before we go, have you got any to show us nearby?
Give me 30 seconds. Hang on.
30 seconds. Okay. Shall we do some counting? I'm intrigued by what's behind as well. There's quite an interesting portrait on the wall back.
Right, here we go. This is a rather nice one I bought just the other week, actually. And this is a proper, actually, you know, I completely missed a trick here, because this is what I should have been talking about. If I hold it up,
Yeah. Towards a bit higher.
There we go.
Oh, yes.
I'll read it afterwards.
Okay.
That's one side.
Yeah.
And the other side is like so.
Yeah.
Possibly read it. Well, it's actually rather brilliant, and on one side it's got two birds joined with a heart in the centre.
Yeah.
Underneath it says "Altar of Love," and on the other side it says Charles Gambling, born Bath, February the 14th, 99, for the girl I love. It's rather fantastic. Yes, I mean, you know, yes, it's a wonderful image and completely different to the kind of thing I've really been describing this morning.
You'll have to send us in 2 images that we can put on Valentine's Day on our...
What a idea, yes. I'm certainly going to be making one of my greetings cards out of these.
And one of your Instagram posts. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for sort of being our guinea pig for the first Instagram Live. But we have thought of someone better. We really wanted to do something that had an interesting take on love and Valentine's Day and love tokens and with these rich stories. So thank you so much for joining.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much indeed.
We'll see you again very soon.
Excellent. Bye-bye then.